Hello. As you all should know by now, I'm Vernon Clemens. I'm known for many things, including, but not limited to, my famous conquering of every seat.
You are mine.
Conquered. My devilishly good looks.
Blue steel.
And my world-class dance moves. However, what you may not know is that I'm also a comic book expert. Allow me to take you on a journey, if you will, through my house. Let the house be a metaphor for the history of comics. Each room will represent a different era in the comic book history. You may ask, in what way does each room represent each era? And to that I say, this is history class, not English. How am I supposed to know? Although we will be skipping it today, I would first like to acknowledge the fact that comic strips have been around for over a century before the original comic book was formed. These comics had been published serially, but never actually in book form until many, many years later. These were called proto-comic books. Moving right along. In here, we have the hallway. This was the glorious, well, kinda glorious, era known as the Platinum Age of comic books. It began in 1897 with the publication of The Yellow Kid in McFadden Flats. It was 196 pages long, printed on 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and sold for 50 cents. The latest copy sold for over 14,000. Anyway, The Yellow Kid is a small, bald boy wearing all yellow who lived in the slums in late 1800s New York and spoke in slang. Now, allow me to present you a picture of an example from this book, and let me narrate it in my succulent voice.
Here comes Liz. I'll just hide. She'll be surprised to find me standing here. Liz, somebody has took an unfair advantage of me. Oh, Liz, I'm behind my rent, or vice versa. Holy gee. My dear Liz, you'll have to excuse me till I go home and change my clothes. The Yellow Kid loses some of his yellow.
That's some funny stuff. Anywho, this is where the term comic book came from, as it was printed on the back of The Yellow Kid in McFadden Flats. As you can see, many conventions commonly used in comic books today have not been established yet. For example, all of the panels were in simple rectangular shapes, as opposed to the dynamic or otherwise interesting shapes that have been comics since the Golden Era. In addition, there are no speech bubbles, as you may have noticed. All the dialogue is written on the Yellow Kid's chest. And, frankly, that doesn't seem like the best way to go. Side note, as we're moving to the kitchen for the Golden Era, I would just like to note that the first Detective Comics, or DC, was published in this era. At the time, though, they were horribly racist against Asians. Here we are in the kitchen, the famous Golden Era of comic books. It began in 1937 with the publication of Action Comics #1, featuring Superman. Now, this ushered in a new era, an era of superheroes, the hero archetype of being invincible, impervious to everything, and completely moral, with the exception of Batman, who is rather gritty.
I shall now record some of the original Superman comic. Jor-El, I'm afraid our newborn son, Kal-El, is rather a roughneck. He gave the doctor a discolored eye, and I've had difficulty in preventing him leaping for my arms. Just like your dad. Are you happy, dear? More than I can ever. Suddenly, the room begins to quiver. At first slowly, then with increasing violence. Jor-El, what? An earthquake! Clutched in the tremor's merciless fury, Jor-El's womb commences to topple before the terrific strain.
Truly moving. Almost brings a tear to my eye. What? No, I'm manly and stuff. Be quiet. Anyway, many others were established during this time that had a similar superhero archetype, including, but not limited to, Captain America, Captain Marvel, I already said Batman, Wonder Man, and Wonder Woman, who are not related, by the way. I would also like to note this is the first time comic books truly reflected our fears. The superheroes gain their power from what we fear the most at any given time period, starting with the Golden Era. In this case, Superman. He came from space. At the time, we knew nothing about space. In fact, it was still popular to believe that space was a liquid known as the aether. Moving right along. Here we are, the dining room, the Silver Age of comics. Comic books had largely died out in the late 1950s due to attacks from Dr. Wertham and his mob of angry parents who thought that comic books were detrimental to health and your mental facilities. Now, all these people were wrong. Comic books turned out to be okay. That's why we still have them. Anyway, the Silver Age was born with a revamped version of The Flash in 1961. Allow me to read from that very comic.
As he concluded his narrative, Barry sees a strange look pass between Jay Garrick and his wife. How could he possibly know all that? We were sure we'd kept that secret so well. How did he find out? Before I tell you that, watch as I press this ring. Something shooting out of the ring. Looks like a costume. Donning his uniform, Barry Allen becomes the Flash. You see, on my Earth, I'm also the Flash, just as you are on yours. 2 Earths? What are you talking about? Rapidly, Barry, Flash Allen, relates his recent experience on the stage of the community center. Then, the way I see it, I vibrated so fast I tore a gap in the vibratory shield separating our worlds. As you know, 2 objects cannot occupy the same space at the same time if they vibrate at different speeds.
The Silver Age featured comic book characters that had real problems that could be connected to by, people today, or at least the time period. Not only did they struggle with supervillains and managing their superpowers, but they also struggled with things like day-to-day problems such as rent or relationships. A perfect example of this is Bruce Banner as the Hulk. Oh my goodness. As I was saying, a perfect example of this is Bruce Banner as the Hulk, where he had to deal with keeping himself being calm in an average workplace, like the lab where he worked. Speaking of the Hulk, he got his powers from gamma radiation, which, at the time period, had just been discovered to cause mutation in humans, once again reflecting the fears of the time period.
And here we are in the living room. The Bronze Age of comics began in 1970 with the publication of Conan the Barbarian. It lasted for 20 years, although originally it was a pulp fiction series published in the 1920s and 30s. However, the Bronze Age saw the new rise of the gritty hero, much like the Batman, established in 1939. Now, we're still in the Bronze Age, with the publications of comics such as Dark Horse, but I will read from you the original 1970 Conan comic.
Hold on, girl. I'm coming. It's too late, Conan. Too late. Devil take 'em. Women are no blasted good. They tease you, caress you, promise you the moon on a silver platter, but when the fighting starts, they whimper in the nearest dark corner, and then leave you to hack your way out or die.
An especially notable example is in 1971, when Marvel published Spider-Man numbers 96 through 98. These broke the rules of the Comic Code Authority, established back in the 1950s by the aforementioned doctor, in order to prevent young kids' mind from being poisoned. Anyway, it broke these rules because it showed the harmful effects of drugs. Before then, drugs had just never been mentioned. It was revolutionary. And finally, to wrap it all up, Spider-Man, if you have seen the new movies, had recently gotten his powers from being bit by a genetically engineered spider, reflecting the fears of the present day. Genetic engineering is a new field, and we're still exploring its possibilities. As you can see, comic books have evolved drastically over time, and throughout the time have reflected the knowledge gained in the time periods.
And that concludes our history of comics. Thank you very much.